Good evening. Welcome to Zoom into Nature Flying Squirrels. This evening, Dr. Don Althoff will deliver his presentation, Southern Flying Squirrels, Facts and Fascination with a Woodland Wonder. I am Renee Barranca, the Director of Conservation Education and Outreach at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. At the Land Conservancy, I develop virtual and in-person programming for people of all ages. I'm fortunate to be able to host our field trips within the network of conservation properties the Land Conservancy has protected throughout Northeast Ohio, which totals over 75,000 acres of natural landscapes, family farms, and urban green spaces. As I've mentioned during past webinars, I often pick topics out of my own curiosity. That is certainly the case tonight. I've always been interested in flying squirrels and hope to someday chance upon one in the wild. According to the Ohio Division of Wildlife, flying squirrels are one of the most common squirrels in Ohio. So maybe we'll get some pointers tonight to improve my search techniques. As always, please remember to place your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Please don't use the chat feature. It's too hard to track the questions. We'll spend time at the end of the program covering those questions. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Don Althoff. Excuse me. Dr. Althoff is a certified wildlife biologist and professor emeritus of wildlife conservation at the University of Rio Grande. He earned his BS in Wildlife Management from The Ohio State University, an MS in Wildlife Sciences from the University of Nebraska, and his PhD in Wildlife Ecology from Penn State University. He has conducted research in forest and grassland ecosystems with a focus on a variety of species ranging from vertebrates and plants to nematodes. One of his main endeavors since the mid 1990s has been southern flying squirrel in southeast Ohio. There's a lot of alliteration in this, including evaluation of a technique to age squirrels and the influence of annual hard mast production on local populations. That effort is a component of the Rio Eco Monitoring Project that provides hands-on learning opportunities for University of Rio Grande undergraduates participating in inventory and monitoring of local flora and fauna. So welcome, Don.
Oh, thank you very much, Renee. Appreciate this opportunity to talk about flying squirrels, one of my favorite
Great.
species.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so go ahead and launch.
Yep, go ahead.
Start a glide. Okay, well, uh, appreciate all who have tuned in this evening, and hopefully I will be able to share one or two or three things that maybe you didn't know about flying squirrels. Um, I'm saving the best for last, assuming that the video will work. You'll actually get to see some glides. I'll acknowledge the person who took these awesome videos. But along the way, I'll try to pretty much share what I've used field-wise and some of the things that I've learned in this whole time chasing this species. So pretty much everything starts with a ladder. It's a 35-pound ladder. I've gone through three of these over the years. It's adjustable. Maybe you can see in the bottom left, it actually has an extra leg that you can adjust because in Southeast Ohio, nothing's flat. And so that's pretty important for making the adjustment. I'm 6 feet tall, so you can see this box is probably up about 12 feet high. That's kind of typical for where we place them. And the ladder becomes really important because not only putting up the box, but checking the boxes. And then if we have a capture, we have occupants, we'll take the box off of the tree. This is a close-up that we very seldom see this happen. We usually are able to get to the tree and get up to the box and get a plug in that hole before somebody pops their head out. But I think over the years, a few of the flying squirrels have recognized when the ladder is clanging through the woods that maybe they should think about getting out. Also, we'll mention at this point that that metal plate has been very critical to the longevity of my boxes. The first 110 boxes I put out back in the 90s, within 14 months, every one of those boxes, the hole was compromised, didn't have a plate on it, and basically it was gray squirrels or fox squirrels that chewed the hole to make it bigger. And once that happened, flying squirrels weren't interested in occupying the boxes. I'm going to mention it now and again at the end. There's many opportunities if you would like to come out for a winter box check. We usually have a really good time. If you scanned very quickly every individual in this picture. They're all smiling, except for the person in the upper left-hand corner, and that's George. And you might wonder what George's assignment was on this particular day. Well, George had to carry the ladder. And I will come back to that near the end. I talk about the 5 hickory nut technician recognition program that I have going on. But it's quite a chore to carry that ladder to all 25 boxes at a site. Okay, by the numbers. I started this in 1995. I mentioned earlier about 110 boxes. I'm up to 400 boxes now that I'm checking every winter. I started with 5 sites. I'm now up to 16 sites, and I've done at least 283 box checks. So I've carried a ladder most of those times, but I'm always appreciative of those who've come out and assisted carrying it. And then as far as total captures, I haven't had my hands on all 3,532 of these squirrels, but in the course of the project, people who have assisted have also put their hands on them. But that's how many squirrels we've come across in this since in 1995 using the boxes. Okay, so throughout this presentation, I'll probably you'll just see SFS. Just keep in mind that's short for Southern Flying Squirrel. And this picture on the right automatically gives you a sense of how big these guys are. I don't have particularly big hands, but I think the best comparison to say is this is basically a chipmunk with some extra skin between its wrist and its hind feet. That's called a patagium, but they're really a pretty small critter. Okay, in the past decade, not anything that I've come up with, but basically there's been kind of a new discovery. And that new discovery is that now there are 3 species of Glycomes, which is the genus for the flying squirrels, not 2. Spend a little time on this map. If you look to the right where it says G. volans, that darker solid gray, that's the Southern Flying Squirrels distribution. So pretty much the eastern half of the United States. You see a hatched area. That's where their range overlaps with the northern flying squirrel. And then out west, which the box on the left has been enlarged, they did some DNA work and essentially determined that the northern flying squirrel has a close relative, actually, and the new species has been dubbed Glycomes orgonensis, or Humboldt's flying squirrel. Humboldt's being associated with the university folks that basically found that one. I want to point out one other thing. I put a red box around this. Those 2 little hatched areas are also where you find northern flying squirrels. One of those little distribution areas is in West Virginia. One of them is in North Carolina. Probably anytime soon not to meet. So those are isolated areas where you have the northern flying squirrel, which is a little bit bigger than the southern flying squirrel. So you know your Ohio map, we're pretty much out of the range of ever getting northern flying squirrels in our native woods. Okay, so I'm going to stick pretty much with the southern flying squirrel throughout this presentation. Pre-settlement by our European ancestors, basically, Ohio was, as you pretty much know, is largely covered with forest. Over time, some of that has changed, and we get more of a fragmented situation. I show this slide to point out that in the upper right probably is where you could find flying squirrels. You have some trees in the foreground and even around the house. Too far for individual to glide, not very adept at moving on the ground. So tendency is for them to be pretty much isolated where you have some woodlots. Fortunately in Ohio, we have quite a lot of habitat still that's conducive to supporting flying squirrels. Now I drew a line here that pretty much shows you what was the last glaciated and unglaciated areas of Ohio. So the southern eastern part is prime flying squirrel habitat. It doesn't mean they aren't in the other parts of the state, because in fact that they are. Put a little dot here, I think, to get it pretty close, Renee, to where the Western Land Reserve is. So you're well within the territory, the distribution of where this species should be found. But greatest numbers would be in this area that I've highlighted to the south and to the east. My particular studies have focused on very much southern or southeastern Ohio. I've enlarged here the 6 counties that I have flying squirrel boxes in. The little black dots will relate to something later on that I'll talk about. But for the most part, I have a lot of boxes in Athens County. I have a lot in Gallia, and then a few spread throughout the other counties that are listed here. And again, all this land for the most part is pretty hilly, makes for a challenge in carrying the ladder. I will add that on the far left, bottom left, you see Pike County. That's the last one I added a few years ago, and I only did that because the site was relatively flat. Okay, so I've already mentioned I have 16 sites. Most recently, in other words, in the last decade or so, if I added any site, I always put out 25 boxes, usually in about a 5x5 grid with boxes between 35 and 50 yards apart. This means I'm monitoring roughly 400 boxes. So I do 3 major things each year. I do winter counts, early December to late January. When I first started doing this study and I put out boxes in the 90s, I checked them every month for the first year, every other month for the second year. And I determined that December and January are the time when I would find the most squirrels in the boxes. Clearly, this is a situation where they're taking advantage of sharing heat during the coldest time of the year. I also do hard mass surveys. I just completed the last one here in the last 24 hours. If you want to know more about that, you might ask later. But basically, I'm going out and counting nuts, and I want to see long-term how that hard mass variation probably influences what the flying squirrel numbers are doing. And then I also do breeding bird surveys at these 16 sites. I was doing this initially to give students an opportunity to do point counts, but I'll mention later on some observations we've made of interactions between flying squirrels and songbirds and woodpeckers. And so perhaps my surveys will have a little bit more relevance that I could connect to. Okay, why did I identify this species as a woodland maverick? Well, probably everybody has seen the top 2 species on the right, fox squirrel, gray squirrel. Maybe you've had a chance to see a red squirrel, but these guys are all diurnal, meaning they're out during the daytime. So flying squirrel is very different. For the most part, it's only nocturnal. It's really rare if you see them during the daytime. If you do, you've probably disturbed it. It's probably not been out on its own. They are more adept at navigating the aerial space in a woodlot. They can get quite a distance from one tree to the next, whereas every once in a while, a gray squirrel must think that it's a flying squirrel, but it usually ends up on the ground and not close to a tree to escape perhaps a predator or to try to get to that next tree. Flying squirrels are extremely colonial/social in the winter. 3 or 4 in a box is not uncommon. My record is 15 in a box, which we've witnessed twice. So a lot of really chance for these animals to share body heat at that point. And probably my boxes are a little bigger cavity-wise than what a normal cavity would be. So maybe there's a little bit of inflation there for group sizes. And the final thing I want to emphasize here is the flying squirrel's jaws. Its overall head size is too small to put like an acorn or a hickory nut or a walnut into its mouth and crush the nut. So to appreciate this, particularly consider the unshelled hickory nut. They would like to put it back between the molars and premolars, but that's not possible. Really, the size of the head matches only that of about a quarter. So something like your acorns and your hickory nuts are not going to fit in there so that they can crack that open. So this is the characteristic you should be looking for in a cavity. You find maybe some of these on the ground. This is referred to as a cut nut. And if you look very closely, maybe a little bit more at the bottom than the top of this opening, they create a bevel, and they actually gnaw this hole into the nut. Now, I've done a fair job of trying to lighten the inside of this cut nut, but all the meat is gone from it. And that's the other thing that's really amazing about the flying squirrel is they literally scoop out all the meat that's in there. I've had very few nuts that I come across like this for the hickory nut that it wasn't completely devoid of the quote, the good stuff. So there must be a reason that this stuff is, they go to this effort, particularly with the hickory nut. So let me emphasize here just a little bit why they favor hickory nuts over acorns. And the information I'm going to share with you is not my own data, but people have done chemical analysis on acorns and on hickory nuts. And I'm just going to give you a small snapshot of some of the differences here. If we look at energy and think here really fat content, if we look at sodium, which is important for pH balance, muscle balance, and a few other things. Phosphorus, calcium, you recognize those as two important nutrients. If a flying squirrel eats the same amount of hickory nut meat compared to an acorn, he's going to get 1.5 more times calories. That means a whole bunch in terms of effort that they put into retrieving that meat. Sodium, about equal, but maybe about 25% more is going to be in a hickory nut. Phosphorus content is considerably higher in a hickory nut. And calcium, 1.5 to almost 2 times more. So just focusing on these 4 nutrients, these 4 components of the hickory nut, you can appreciate that, okay, it really must be worth going for the hickory nuts. There's one other really, really important factor, and that is there are virtually no tannins in the meat of hickory nuts. Acorns, if it's black or red or scarlet, it probably has a lot of tannins in it. Now, you and I, if we were to bite into the meat of those acorns, it'd be very bitter. The influence of tannins are on reduction of digestibility. So it doesn't make the squirrel sick, but it just disrupts their ability to be as efficient when they're getting things down through the stomach and into the small intestine to break down it into smaller and smaller molecules. Another way to say this is that essentially if you had your choice as a flying squirrel, you're going to take a hickory nut over an acorn anytime. I won't go into much detail about this later, but I'll just throw it out right now. I always thought initially that flying squirrels just lived off of hickory nuts. But I now know that in most years, hickories are not producing a lot. There could be a banner year every once in a while, but for the most part, they're probably really finding that the acorn crop is more important to their year-to-year survival. Okay, so back to the chicks. We put a ladder up against a tree. Someone goes up, puts a plug in the hole, and then we open up the box. And hopefully you can see that there's a screen that the individual is pulling away from the box, and that gives a chance to, one, keep the flying squirrels in there after that bigger door is open, and we see if anybody's home. If nobody's home, we'll make some estimate of how deep the nut shells are in the box, or if there's nesting material. In the wintertime, we're really only going to find flying squirrels, or we could find mice like a deer mouse or a white-footed mouse. We're not finding any tree frogs, we're not finding any snakes, and not wasp. Once in a while we have bees that occupy these boxes, and that's yet another story, but for the most part we're looking for the flying squirrel. Now this misleads you a little bit. We're not going to find pups during these winter checks, but this is what they look like. These are probably 4 or 5 day old pups. A couple of things you can notice here is they're pretty much no hair. There are whiskers, so those are present at birth. The other key feature here is, and it's in lighter color, is that stretch of skin that connects the front to the hind legs. And that's called the patagium, present at birth. And that's pretty much what gives them their sail, if you will. I'm going to move into our process of handling the squirrels once we get them, we find we have them in the box. Now, off to the left, you see part of a box. We have a tube that we've developed, and the idea is we're going to goose these squirrels out of the box into this tube. This particular image here shows 3 chambers. At the end of the box, we'll put, into the tube, we'll put a icing bag. I'll have you a shot of that here in a little bit. And this particular picture, you could perhaps see that there's 3 squirrels lined up in individual chambers. Okay, so I'm going to show this video hopefully here for just a little bit. And you can see that an icing bag is to the right. Yes, the icing bag that you might do for making gingerbread houses. We've snipped off the narrow end to allow air passage. And soon as the individual is ready and has removed the gate, the last gate, then we'll try to encourage the flying squirrel to go into the bag.
Looks good. There is no sound for these videos, everyone, if you're wondering. He looks a little reluctant to go into the bag.
Okay, so each animal at that point, we've got to wait for it. Flying squirrels are roughly one person find them as adults is basically weighing like the size of a stick of butter. So gram wise, they're usually at this time of year 70 to 90 grams. If it was a pregnant female, which again we're not finding in the winter, she might be closer to 100 grams. Okay, I have another video here where it's actually going to take it out of the bag and go through the process of um, looking a little closer to see what's going on here. It's a good close-up here of the incisors, particularly the bottom incisors. So at this point, they determine it's male or female. They're collecting a scat sample. And a little teaser here, if you would happen to come out. We got flying squirrels. You're very likely get an opportunity to handle one of these and perhaps release it. First timers, you don't get to do that until we got all of our data. But anyway, that's kind of a rare opportunity. We got a little carried away once. We wanted to see what's happening with the flying squirrel when they're in the tube. So we did open one end. This guy was up at the other end. And these guys are like turning a sock inside out. Here's a little video of them coming down the tube. Whoops. Let me get this. Okay. Perhaps the coolest thing you witness right there at the end is how long their whiskers are, their vibrissae. They're extremely long, 3 inches or so, part of their tactile repertoire. Okay. Um, why do we consider these guys dark/nighttime specialists? Well, there's nobody else out there that's as big as they are that's foraging on the tree trunks and on the limbs. Certainly, bats are out there at night collecting insects, but they're not doing their foraging on trees or catching a, vast majority of what they consume on the wing. They also have amazing flight control. I wish I could take credit for the picture in another diagram again, but you have the patagium, so you have quite a lot of area to catch air, and a tail that maybe at first appearance you don't pick up on, but it's flat in the one dimension. Okay, so let's focus here on how this species becomes an aerial acrobat. I've already mentioned the patagium. This is a very loose, stretchy, thin piece of skin. Um, as mentioned, that the patagium is there at birth. It just has to get enlarged and furred. They have extremely large eyes, very reflective, and considering low light conditions, that's really important. And they must have an incredible ability to accommodate as they're moving towards objects. All of us are probably familiar with the peregrine falcon and how fast it can fly. Um, Musculature in the eye allows it to change very quickly, going over 100 miles an hour. I'm not here suggesting that flying squirrels go that fast, but the speed in which they do move and they come up on objects clearly, they've got an amazing ability to see. And then this flexible tail that's flat, as I noted already, kind of serves as a rudder. And at the very end, when you do see some video, if this goes well, it'll all be in slow motion. Perhaps you can keep track of this tail every once in a while. I'm going to give you a stick kind of animation here in a moment as to how its position changes as the flying squirrel approaches and lands on a trunk. Okay. So it is very important to appreciate that it's one thing to be up in the air. The next thing is to stick the landing. So if you'll bear with me here, this is my stick figure tree, if you will. That's a tree trunk. It's vertical. This flying squirrel is coming towards it. So in my very simplified diagram here, you have the head, you have the torso, and then you have the tail. And as the flying squirrel is approaching the tree, it's starting to become, its spine area is starting to become parallel with the tree, and the tail is starting to become perpendicular to the tree. And it's in pretty much that posture at the moment that it actually lands on the tree. And as soon as it does, about 95, 90, 99% of the time, it's going to go around to the opposite side of the tree, probably keeps going up a few feet or a lot of feet. But this is a very common thing we get to witness during the release of these individuals during the daytime. Again, I want to repeat, they hit the tree, they go around the other side. It's probably a predator avoidance strategy, and they are very, very quick once they get on the tree. All right, I'm going to show you details of two glides and then one glide that we've seen several times. Again, this is kind of leading up to the end where you get to see the real thing going on. But my animations here are intended to give you appreciation for their maneuverability. So witness this glide back in the 1990s. We were up on a ridge top and we were releasing squirrels, again, one at a time. It was all downhill from here. Those two blue things are two pretty large trees, each of them about 1 foot to 2 feet in diameter breast height. So I'm to the far left. I'm able to see this flying squirrel go straight down the hill. And I'm watching it, and I'm pretty sure it's going to hit smack dab in the middle of that tree. But very quickly, it does move around this tree, and it's still about the same distance from the ground. Yes, it's losing altitude, but it's still about the same distance from the ground. Heading right towards another tree, does the same thing, and just keeps going out of sight. So this glide was at least 50 yards. And I lost sight of it after that. I mean, it's way, way down the hill, and impossible. But it's just amazing the control they have to turn and, in this case, continue to make the same, keep the same path. In this particular instance, you're looking straight down. So we got three trees here. Upper left is a tree that the flying squirrel is on. You might think that it's going to go, based on this dots that I put in here, that's going to go to the tree in the bottom. But in fact, what it did was it essentially went around that one big tree and did a 90-degree turn onto another tree. I'm not sure what happens that makes them do this at the last moment, say, oh, I think I'm going to go to a different tree. But there's none of this straight line stuff for the most part. They can maneuver. They very seldom hit branches that are in the way. They're just really, really amazing. It happens all so fast. You're just in awe if you get to see it in daytime because you get to watch the entire glide. Okay, this particular glide happened, I believe, 3 years ago. Again, you have to kind of here accept my stick drawings, but on the right is a tree. On the left is the about 15 yards away from that tree where we had all our equipment on the ground and we had the box on the ground and we had our crew standing there at that point. And once we release a squirrel, it usually gets everybody focused because an individual walks over to a nearby tree, positions or gets the squirrel close to the tree and releases it. So this particular squirrel ran up the tree about 20, 30 feet, paused for a moment. Usually they go much higher. And then unbelievably headed towards where it just had been sexed, weighed, pulled out of a plastic bag, ear tagged. And it looked like it was going to land on the tarp. I have no idea how this happened, but it pulled up and essentially did almost a figure eight, came back to the base of that same tree, ran up the other side, and then took a glide in the other direction. That one was the most spectacular I've ever witnessed just because of the change in altitude. In this case, going down and go back up again. It was not a particularly windy day, so it's not like it caught a big gust of wind to pull this off. Okay, so that's it for the glides until the end. I'm going to go through 5 things I think. I'm stealing from a sports writer from several years ago who had done a lot of observations, and you think what's going on, and then something else comes along and changes your analysis. But anyway, if you read in the field guides, and very often people will say, well, a single female has 2 litters a year. That's not exactly what happens out there very often. It's pretty rare for the same female to have 2 litters. So there's usually a spring littering period in Ohio. Breeding takes place in maybe as early as late January, but probably first, second week of February. Gestation is 40 days. Pups are born usually around first, second week of April. So we consider those spring litters. There's another kind of synchronous period that happens when they get together again in maybe May. Litters born usually in June. So for a single female to produce 2 litters in the same year is really rare. I only have witnessed this one time. So if she has a litter in the spring, she probably is not going to have another litter until the next year. If she has a summer litter, she's probably not going to have a spring litter the next year. It's probably going to be the next year after that. The one time I did observe the same female producing 2 litters, I had every suspicion she was 3 or 4 years old or older. Another thing I think is that the males and the females, the adults here, they move around a whole bunch. During the 90s, I had quite a few flying squirrels radio tagged. I went out 4 to 5 days a week, or I had students go out those other days that I wasn't out. And so we would find where the flying squirrels were. 2 squirrels that I got to track roughly 18 to 22 consecutive months. The male, who I, yes, named Rocky, found him in 31 different boxes and or cavities. So just think about that for a moment. We think of a lot of species having a den or two. Um, in this case, Rocky was all over the woodlot. His home range was probably 5 to 8 acres in size, and he was not defending any one particular area. Female Lucy actually found her in 38 different boxes and or cavities over that 22-month period. Again, there's not much advantage to trying to defend an acorn crop. So I think this is kind of a response of the flying squirrels moving to where maybe there are caches of nuts or there's abundance of nuts from a particular year's crop, particularly in the fall and the spring. So they're very much not attached to a single site, at least not for month after month or for a yearly period. I was thinking, and I've been indoctrinated by this from my days at Ohio State in wildlife management. We're always supposed to save every snag/dead tree because they provide important cavities for a variety of species. So not just woodpeckers and some of our songbird species, but also flying squirrels. And so you would think they would be pretty important trees. Well, in monitoring them with radio collars, I basically found that about 73% of the time, flying squirrels are in cavities that are in live trees. Now, it's really difficult for us to get up into these trees and be able to find these cavities, but there's no question there's lots of little small cavities up in live trees. Limbs fall off, they get blown off, broken off. Eventually, there's some rotting there. So that becomes the actual prime locations for flying squirrels. And I think that even in relatively young forest, there's probably a lot of cavities up there that could accommodate 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 flying squirrels. I have emphasized quite a bit in my talk tonight about food resources, and that's being primarily nuts. But clearly, they have to be eating something else at other times of the year. In spring, as trees are starting to, buds are starting to swell, those are pretty nutritious. Fairly confident that this is one thing that the flying squirrels take advantage of. In the summer and probably late spring and early fall, they're eating insects. And they could also be eating songbird eggs and or chicks. And I'll hit on that again here in just a moment. I don't think it's a major thing, but based on some observations, I don't think the songbird community takes flying squirrels lightly. And I put a picture here of the cicada. A couple years ago was our big year for cicadas down here. The next year, we didn't really have a bounce in flying squirrel numbers, but I have no doubt that flying squirrels eat a lot of these guys when they do show up. But if you're on a 17-year-old, wait for that. Usually, you got to find something else to feast on. Okay, I think this is my fifth one, but I want to basically emphasize that I am now, in my mind, uh, believing that old growth forests are probably not the prime habitat for flying squirrels. Now, old growth usually implies large trees with large canopies, and we might think that large trees with large canopies, particularly hickories and oaks, produce a lot of hard mast. Okay. You'd also think they'd have a lot of cavities, and so therefore we got two major things met, food resource and resting habitat or places to escape predators. So I want to put this diagram up here. This is not my data. It's data from, I believe, the Tennessee area. But many of you may be familiar that with tree sizes, we measure the diameter breast height. So on the x-axis here, you see 10 inches, 14, 18, so on and so on. So from left to right, you have progressively larger trees, or you might think of them as older trees. On the y-axis, you have the estimate they had of acorns per tree, and roughly going from 500 to 3,500. Now, the first three species that I have graphed here, scarlet, black, and chestnut oak, Those look pretty good, don't they? As the trees get bigger, at least for the black and the scarlet, you see that their hard mass production, probably over an average of a few years, keeps increasing as the tree gets bigger. But red oak, which is very common in Southeast Ohio, that's not the case. At roughly 18 to 22 inches DBH is when those trees peak for producing hard mass, and then there's quite a bit of decline. And then what's considered the main staple for squirrel populations in a lot of areas would be the white oak. And the white oak, although it takes a little bit longer or a little bit bigger trees, but by the time that tree gets to be 26 to 30 inches DBH, it starts to decline. So a takeaway message from this is, again, I think we might initially look at this and think that a middle-aged, an older-aged woodlot with bigger trees is prime, but I actually believe that a younger forest that has a combination of what we consider pole and saw-sized timber trees, where you have the most hard mass production, you still probably have lots of cavities. Okay, I teased this just a little bit going through, and that is songbirds and woodpeckers and interactions with flying squirrels. So I'm putting up 5 species of small birds here. The 2 on the right you might recognize as primary cavity nesters, red-bellied woodpecker and the downy woodpecker. Down just to the left of those are 3 secondary cavity nesters, bluebirds, titmice, chickadees. We could add nuthatch here to this list. And so what I've witnessed now about 35 times is when we have released a flying squirrel and we let it go up a tree, we'll not be seeing any songbirds in the area. Now, this is in the middle of the winter. And then all of a sudden, we have these songbirds showing up. So here's a video, and you might be able to see in a couple of areas these birds, but this goes pretty quickly. But the flying squirrel is going to be on one of the branches, and it's going to try to get away from these mobbing songbirds. So eventually he's going to glide here, and the birds chase him a little bit. They don't ever actually directly attack the flying squirrel, but they will persist and stay after it until it goes into a cavity. I've witnessed as many 3 different species at the same time going after the flying squirrel. So what might prompt this behavior, this interaction? Well, we know the flying squirrel is active at nighttime. We know that songbirds and woodpeckers are active during the daytime. And then again, flying squirrels as we get into the night. So there is this time period here where probably at dusk and dawn, they could have direct interaction. But the other possibility is if I'm a flying squirrel out at night and I'm checking a cavity, there might be a songbird in that cavity. It may or may not be sitting on eggs. Vice versa, there could be a flying squirrel during the daytime in a cavity, and a songbird comes and checks it out. So at least at this latitude, this part of the distribution, these guys probably interact every once in a while, and the songbirds and woodpeckers very much do not want to have the flying squirrels around. Okay, my research focus, and I'll move through this fairly quickly, but I am looking at long-term population trends. I'm very interested to see how the local populations vary with the hard mass production. And I've been working on collecting enough data that I hope I can look at the facial features to age them other than adult versus subadult. So now you're gonna have to bear with me a little bit on this aging process. I saw a paper a few years ago put out by the Forest Service. They were working with the northern flying squirrel, NFS here. And they said you could look at the forehead slope and some dips. Now, they didn't have any pictures, but they had a diagram of a flying squirrel. And they said, if you look in this region right here, some things change along that line from the nose to the top of the forehead. So my first diagram here, you see a little indentation. That's a dip. Then they say that dip goes away. And then they say that dip comes back. And you basically have a 1 year, a 1.5, or greater than 1.5-year-old flying squirrel. I am not buying into this because, one, I think it's very hard to be able to discern that just by holding it in your hand. But it has intrigued me enough that I've decided I'm going to try to do analysis digitally. So every flying squirrel that we get our hands on, we basically take a mug shot. So in this picture, you got a calculator on the right, a $10 calculator. I plug in the box number, I hit the decimal point, and then I hit the ear tag number. So now my photograph has already been ID'd to that particular animal. You can see the yellow ruler, so I have scale. Okay, and I'm going to basically take a series of measurements. One from the tip of the nose or the muzzle to the eye. That might be the first measurement. I might take the distance, curvature from the back of the eye around to the top of the muzzle. That's a second measurement. And a third measurement might be how far that same red line is from the ear. And there's possibility to also take measurements looking straight forward on the animal. For those CSI fans, you kind of appreciate that this goes into a computer someday and magically comes out with a number and says, okay, the squirrel could be a year old, could be 2 years old, could be 3 years old, could be 4 years old. That's what I'm hoping will come with this. Okay. I will wrap this up by saying that this project has been greatly enhanced and benefited from volunteers and students who have participated. And I mentioned earlier about people have come out and they had one requirement, perhaps to carry the ladder to meet one of the 5 criteria, and they need to become a 5-hickory nut technician. These are 2 individuals who have come out the most times. Now, Colin on the right has been out 38 times. And Yoshi now has been out 38 times. So you only have to come out 5 times, but you have to do a set of tasks to earn one of these custom-made plaques. So on the left is the flying squirrel picture that I really enjoy the most that I have. On the right, you can see the individual who's holding a flying squirrel. And in the middle is that declaration that they are now officially a Southern Flying Squirrel 5-hickory nut technician. It lists the basic requirements there. And I put my John Hancock on it to make it totally official. Across the top, hopefully you caught your eye, were 5 hickory nuts. No 5 hickory nuts cut by flying squirrels. So none are exactly the same. The frame is made of hickory. So this is kind of a fun thing to give the students and or the volunteers once they've met the 5 criterion. So I mentioned earlier about carrying the ladder. I've also just mentioned both of these individuals have been out 38 times. How many times do you think they've carried the ladder all the way around on one of my sites? Yep, just 1 time each. So once you've met that milestone, and that's not a requirement, you can also now, an alternative is to keep the data sheet, but we can always use some help carrying the ladder. So 38 times, and these guys have only carried the ladder once apiece. Okay, we'll wrap this up by saying you're welcome to come out. Hopefully, Renee, you can share with those people viewing if they want to send me an email and just say I'd like to be added to your email list. What that means is in mid-November, I can send you my projected schedule for December, January, and if there's a date that looks like might work for you, let me know. I'll put you on a short list, and then 28 to 48 hours before that date, we'll confirm if it's a go or no go. We don't go out if it's raining. We don't go out if it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, or we're projecting a level 2 or 3 snow alert. And also, it takes a minimum of 2 hours to do a site. If we have squirrels, it could be 4 hours. Our record is 6 hours. It doesn't mean you have to be out there the whole time. It just means you'll be able to find your way back to your vehicle if you decide to leave a little bit early. So here's the very last thing. I'm going to credit Lexi Stevenson with this video uh, combination she had. This was at the last site last year. Hopefully this goes very well. This is in slow motion. I think this is two different squirrels, but it's amazing to watch this guy go. Is it going to go? Oh, come on. Okay, well, darn it, Renee.
Yeah.
Let
I'm
me,
surprised. Everything's been working so great.
yeah, let me escape here for just a minute.
Well, you escaped out of the program, just so you know, so you're not sharing anymore.
Okay. Let me see if I can get this one up. Am I sharing now?
Nope. Mm-mm. There you go.
Got it?
Yeah. You're sharing now. The whole PowerPoint program is open though. You're not on that, like you haven't started the program on that slide. So if you go into like slideshow, start from current slide, that
I'm
should be
sorry.
good. Go into the slideshow at the top and click up at the very top, the top
Yeah.
bar where it says
Yeah.
slideshow. Go into that tab and then it'll have a button that you can press that'll say start from the current slide.
Okay. Start from the current slide. Well, I'm actually just on a video right now. Let's,
Well, you shared your PowerPoint, Don. So
okay,
maybe you wanted to share the video so you could stop sharing this one and try to share the video.
okay.
And
Let me start this over again. If I can. Okay. So if I hit on this, you are saying I should maybe be able to go to video?
if you share it, yeah, if you pick the video you're trying to share, it will share it. But you have to go into that share button on Zoom to do that.
Okay. I go back to Zoom. Media player. Oh, did I lose you completely? I bet I
Well,
did.
you didn't. You're still here. You're still here. You did turn your video off though from Zoom, but that's okay. Because we
Um,
can still manage, we can get to the Q&A.
okay. But this is just such a good part of it that I'm
Well, I'll tell you what, even when we do the recording, we can splice in the video so people can see it in all of its
okay.
glory.
Okay. I'm just kind of surprised here that if I click on my video, why it will not share. I'm on media player.
Yeah, I mean, if you hit the share button and then you click the media player, it should pop up on the screen.
Uh,
That looks good. There you go. But it's already started. Can you restart it? There you go. Perfect. We can see it. Wow. Wow. Oh my
crash landing.
gosh. Crash landing. Huh. Is that the same squirrel?
Yes,
Wow.
really rare for this to happen, but usually it's one glide and into a cavity.
Very cool.
It's called using all the tree.
No kidding. That
Okay.
squirrel.
All right.
God.
Yes.
Well, excellent. Well, we have lots of questions, Don. So I don't know if you want to turn your video back on, but if you can't or you don't want to, that's fine. We could still get through the Q&A that we have. There you are. Okay,
Okay.
perfect. Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that video, everyone in the chat saying it was well worth the wait. So I'm glad we
Yes.
got it to work.
Thank you.
Thanks for your persistence.
Yeah, you're welcome. I apologize. You have hung with me. I appreciate your
Yeah,
patience with all this.
no, absolutely. Um, so there's questions. So getting back to the start of your program, a couple
Mhm.
questions about how big that entrance hole is on the flying squirrel box.
Yeah, I've seen dimensions written to make it 1 3/8 inch, but I've gone ahead and make it 1.5. And because I put that metal plate on, which is also 1.5, that is that pretty much will exclude everything else that's bigger, obviously. So gray squirrels, fox squirrels, red squirrels are not going to get in there. Um, and that's the size that I
Okay.
go with, 1.5 inches.
And how big is the actual box that you place?
Oh, okay. If you also send me an email, I can give you a way overkill detailed
Okay.
description of the dimensions and how to assemble one. But it's roughly about 18 inches deep by about 6. So it's a fairly big box. Basically, 3 bluebird boxes stacked on top of each other, if you will, in
Okay.
terms of overall cavity size.
Okay. Um, okay, other than the size and the DNA, what are the differences between northern and southern flying squirrels?
Um, the scientific name for the southern flying squirrel, Glycomis volans, actually translates to little gray mouse. So the southern flying squirrel is a little grayer overall color, and the northern flying squirrel is just a tad more towards the brownish side, and we're talking about on the back side of the
Okay.
animal. Um, Now there can be some variation, and even in the southern flying squirrel, I've come across a couple over the years that weren't completely quote perfectly gray, looked a little darker, but that's really the only major feature that you can see is size and that color difference. And you certainly couldn't pick that up just if they're in an area where there's overlap between the two species. They're moving too fast to pick that
Okay. Okay. So tell us a little bit about this Wilton plastic bag instead of, say, using something like mesh to put the
up.
squirrels
Okay.
in.
Well, originally, not being familiar with the icing bags, I used cloth bags, so they would capture more moisture. You couldn't see the animal inside the bag, and you'd have to have a lot of bags. With this particular bag, it works out really well because after so many animals process, if it gets a little messy, we just obviously get another bag. But it works out really well. Um, they don't scratch through, they don't really even bite through. You might think they might. All they try to do is turn around in there. And I think if you had the mesh, um, you probably have to be squeezing it a lot more and actually coming in direct contact with the animal. So until we get them out, we really don't want to be touching them um, with the mesh. And the other thing is that plastic does roll pretty well when it comes time to fold over the top and do put the alligator clip on there. So that's how those really work. That and again, if it was a wire mesh, we probably would want to clean it out every 3 or 4 or 5. Whereas this way, if we've got a dirty bag, we just get a new bag.
Okay, makes sense. You talked a lot about hickory nuts and acorns. Do they also eat black walnuts?
Yep, and they
Okay.
also eat and they cut into the black walnuts the same way they do a hickory nut. They also eat buckeyes.
Okay. Okay.
And just one other abnormality here. In all the years I've been doing this, and there's been beech trees in almost every woods. There's only one year where I found beech nut holes in the boxes, and that was a year where I didn't find any hickory nuts, and I don't remember if I saw any uh, acorn shells. So I guess you could say that's kind of way down on the list in terms of what they might eat.
Okay. Um, Related to your work that you're doing to age them, is there anything in the dentition that could lead to any age determination?
Uh, Well, no, not separating from maybe a year and a half to a 2, 2.5 to 3, 3.5. There's no replacement. I mean, they do go through a first set of teeth and then a second set of teeth, um, but no, there's nothing there. And if you probably could do like has been done for some larger animals and carnivores, you could extract maybe a molar, premolar, and slice it after staining it and look at the cementum layers. But at that point, consider we want to release every one of these guys intact and alive best we can. We've never considered doing that.
Okay. Okay, here's someone that says that they helped you out several years ago, and you were taking pictures of the squirrel's whiskers and cheeks and had determined each individual had a different whisker pattern. Have you done anything with that? And
Okay.
then she also wants to make sure that everyone knows that she was the first lady to ever carry the ladder around the whole site.
So this has to be Lindsay Leitner. Uh, and yes, she was the first one to do that. The only thing she's been outdone is there's a gal, Christy, who now has done it twice. She has carried the ladder twice.
Lindsay, you
Um,
got to get back down there next year.
yeah. So, and hi, Lindsay. Um, and she does have a plaque that confirms that she's done that. It says it on the plaque. She carried the ladder. Um, I need to back up just a little bit. I have not yet confirmed that the whisker pattern is unique. I've taken enough pictures that I'd like to do it. It's been proven for otters and lions. Those are two species that have a lot bigger surface area to look at, but it probably can result in being unique. It's a situation where you basically would have to go in and put it in a computer situation, put a dot where every one of those whiskers are coming out, and then look at that pattern with an algorithm. I've collected enough data to probably look at that, but this is one of those things that is like so time consuming, and I it's on the back burner. So I'm glad Lindsay brought it up, but I haven't sorted that one out yet. But I can imagine that it probably worked. If that was the case, we could do away with the ear tagging, but at this point, can't do that.
Okay, okay. Can you talk a little bit about the nest material that they use?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've for anybody who's ever gone through a survival training program and you're supposed to be able to make a fire with no matches, one of the things I usually tell you is to get the finest material you can and kind of ball it up. Um, and so what flying squirrels do is they actually shred bark, and there's evidence that it's inner bark that they shred, and they just make it like a ball of wool or steel wool, if you will. Um, I've had some DNA analysis done on 12 nesting samples, and it came back. I thought it was always going to be grapevine, but it turns out grapevine hasn't shown up yet in those samples. It's been oak and maple, and I think some hickory, and I'm trying to think if there was some dogwood in there. But what I would like to do is capture some um, video of them filling a box with this and actually watch it. They have to be shredding it with their teeth. They can't be doing this with their paws. It'd just be too much work, too difficult. But somebody told me that they actually had a bluebird box that they knew a flying squirrel was in, and they came back 3 days later, and that thing was full of this nesting material. So apparently, it happens very rapidly.
Okay. And that was actually the next question. Somebody who monitors bluebird boxes said that they had a flying squirrel jump out of one. So they were curious if they often use bluebird boxes.
Um, I've had I maintain 150 bluebird boxes spread across 3 sites, and I've had two of
Okay.
those sites where once in a while they'll show up. As you know, normally your bluebird boxes are on the edge at most of a wood lot, so I think it's pretty rare, but it does happen. And I'm all for leaving the flying squirrel there. I like the bluebirds just as much, but yeah, it happens once in a while. Pups were actually born in a box, so it must have considered a pretty good spot.
Okay. Okay. Is it true that there are more flying squirrels than diurnal squirrels?
Best estimates are yes in a particular woodlot.
Okay.
I'll spare you a little detail how my estimate comes up on this, but um, in the world of wildlife management, if you were managing gray and fox squirrel populations, you would hope for maybe one squirrel per acre, as can be considered a good population, one that might be harvestable. Uh, my estimates are that we could have 5 to 10 flying squirrels per acre. So clearly, if those are the kind of numbers you have in a woodlot, I think the numbers are there. Now, I mentioned earlier we had as many as 15 in a box. So it probably takes about 5 flying squirrels to come close to an adult gray squirrel, maybe even a little bit more than that. So biomass wise, probably not more, but in terms of numbers, yes,
Okay.
it's just they're nocturnal.
Okay. Do the southern flying squirrels ever interbreed with the northern flying squirrels?
There's no evidence for that,
Okay.
none at all. So they recognizing the differences still.
Okay. I can't remember from your map, was there overlap in Ohio with the northern flying squirrels habitat
No,
or
no,
range?
there's
Okay.
no record of northern flying squirrels ever being in Ohio.
Okay.
I think we'd have to go to Pennsylvania and definitely upstate New York, and there you'd get some overlap of those two species.
Okay. Um, Someone noticed that their ears are small. Do you have any comments about how they depend on hearing?
Well, more recently, it has been documented that they have um, ultrasonic vocalizations. So, i.e., like bats. Now, this is going to generally be a pretty short distance. They've noticed this, detected it with pups and the adult female. In terms of communication, chirping, and stuff like that, probably there's some communication, but I don't know that it's particularly long distance. I mean, not probably anything more than 15, 20 yards or something like that. But surely there has to be some way that they are communicating what's going on. But that's probably a pretty open-ended area for investigation.
Okay. Here's a question about beech leaf disease. So we know that beech leaf disease is prevalent down in southern Ohio. The squirrels are eating the beech nuts and using beech cavities. Is there any information that may show that they could help spread beech leaf disease through their feet or other areas of beech tree contact?
Uh, I have no observations and
Okay.
no suspicions that that is going on. I'm not
Okay.
here to deny it, but I haven't witnessed it. I do know that yes, flying squirrels down here will use beech trees, um, mainly as cavities. Uh,
Mhm.
but no, I don't have anything that would match up with that.
Okay. And for people that might want to come and help you with your surveys, do you require any shots or anything that they would need to have before they can come out?
Well, we're much better shape than in the bat world because this species uh, doesn't carry rabies, doesn't carry hantavirus that anybody's ever detected. Um, it's been really rare that there's been any diseases detected that have been transmitted to humans. If you go to the CDC site, it's been a couple decades almost since anybody has that. So you could get bit. We wear leather gloves. Once in a while, they'll pierce that leather and we'll get a nick. But we've had nobody sustain any injury such. No concern that had any diseases. I always say I'm waiting for the day that somebody gets bit, and then 2 days later we find out that at home they've been jumping up on a table and trying to glide off, and so they somehow got that particular uh, vent that particular interest in being a flying squirrel, but it hasn't happened yet. So that's the other nice thing is you can come out and you can decide not to handle the squirrel, but I will insist that you wear leather gloves.
Of course, sure. Okay, so one last question, and it's a suggestion and probably something you have thought of, but have you ever thought of putting the ladder on a two-wheeler and pulling it around the forest?
Uh, well, if I was in a city park, I think that might be practical. We go up and down hills, and um, it it just I don't know that it would be practical. A lot of places I have to maneuver through multiflora rose and greenbrier and other things. A lot of woods. There's a lot of trees that are blown over. Matter of fact, this past week we had a bunch of them. Um, in the woods that I've been in where trees have blown over. So I wish that was practical. My dream world is ideally is if I could have a jetpack so I could just like fly up to a tree. That would be one way. The other way is if there was enough distance between the trees that I could just have a bucket truck. And we just, like, utility people just drive up to it and raise it up to the level of the box and go from there. But
That would
that's
be wonderful.
that would be wonderful, but then it would be just some probably super groomed woods and wouldn't have the same charm to it as these wild spots do.
So wait a minute. I lied when I said one last question because another one came in that I am curious about this too. How can we find and how are we able to sort of see the squirrels locally day or night? Like what can we do to go out and see them?
Oh wow.
I want my
Well,
time. I mean, I want to make this happen for myself.
the people that I've heard been successful with this, they usually have a porch in the woods and they put out breadcrumbs or bird feed on the railing or whatever. Uh, wait till it starts to get dark. It may not happen the first couple of nights, may take a couple weeks, but eventually flying squirrels may show up.
Yeah.
I've understood people have taken large trees and taken peanut butter and just literally slathered it on the tree trunk,
Oh,
and flying squirrels may show up to get those. Uh,
okay.
Other than that, if you don't have some kind of food that they might be attracted to, I think it's going to be pretty rare to catch up with them.
Okay.
Um,
So,
so.
so Don, I live like right in the middle of Cleveland. Do I have
Mhm.
flying squirrels in my backyard? Potentially. I have lots of
Uh,
trees.
I think it really depends on how much connectivity you have amongst the mature
Okay.
trees. So, in a typical residential area, I would think probably not. But
Okay.
if that residential area backs up to where you have a woodlot,
Mhm.
there's probably a pretty good chance. I mean, most people do end up discovering it. They got flying squirrels because they end up one in their attic, and
Okay.
the only way it got there is because it maneuvered through the neighborhood to get to their place.
Sure thing. Yeah. Well, Don, thanks so much. It was a pleasure having you present tonight. I'm glad all of our tech and sound worked. So, thank you for joining us. And everyone, please register for October 29th. We'll be back on here live talking about Ohio's bats. So, have a good evening, everyone. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Take care.
Mhm.